Now, Nicki Minaj warned people to be careful of what they put into their bodies. Now, Twitter went on to temporarily suspend her account, but denied that it had anything to do with the vaccine tweet. But disinformation on social media platforms is a major concern. How such information is flagged and why are some posts taken down is what we're about to find out. Where is the line between freedom of speech and users' responsibilities drawn? For more on this, we are now joined by Media Monitoring Africa Director William Bird. Such a pleasure to be talking to you, William, on this morning. A very good morning to you. Nicki Minaj, 22.7 million followers on Twitter. Social media misinformation can hurt a lot of people.
Hello, good morning. Yes, it can, and we know the huge amount of harm that it does cause. And when you've got someone who's got that many followers and they post something, it's just what it usually tends to do is that those who may be vaccine hesitant are going to possibly become even more hesitant about having the vaccine, and those who are anti-vaccine are going to be delighted about whatever nonsense that is being put out there. So when you talk about these things, it's not, on social media it seems like, well, it's a fairly ephemeral and what people say may not necessarily cause real public harm, but we know that it does, right? We saw in July the consequences of certain people inciting violence. That has very real world public harm. We've seen countless instances of people posting anti-vaxxer content that also causes real-world public harm. And so when you look at those things, you have to then start to say this is about a balancing of rights, essentially, on some level. And it's also about the platforms saying, well, we have some responsibility to address some of these particular issues.
Now, talk to me, how do we balance those rights, William? I mean, the balance between freedom of speech and a user's responsibility, first of all, from the user side, and then also let's look at the balance of responsibility from Twitter or the other social media platforms, and also being responsible to give users that ability to be free with their speech.
So we've got we've got one of the best constitutions in the world. Our constitutional court takes freedom of expression very seriously. There are countless number of rulings where they talk about its importance and how critical it is, what an essential right it is for a functioning democratic state. At the same time, like all of our rights, it's limited, So this isn't a new thing to suggest that freedom of speech can be legitimately and appropriately limited, right? We all know that if, for example, the K word has got a very particular history, it's got a very particular level and amount of hurt that it causes, and our constitutional court has said, no, that kind of thing. Yes, we have a high level of tolerance for freedom of expression, but that's not acceptable in our country, and we're not going to use that. And if you use that, there are going to be particular consequences where that speech is no longer protected, and the state can and other bodies can legitimately limit that kind of expression, right? And so that's not an unusual thing. What they're doing now in relation to COVID is pretty much applying that same kind of idea, where you're saying, if you're putting out stuff that can cause real public harm, we're saying that causing real public harm means that it's a legitimate way of limiting your right to freedom of expression. So in most instances, what they tend to do is they'll remove that post. In some instances, what they'll do is they'll just put up a warning saying, warning this post, we're not sure that we necessarily trust it or whatever it may be, and check your facts against some other places, right? So they're trying to find different ways of finding that balance. So then you've got the reality that these are companies that are not based in South Africa. They're determined. Their rules that they tend to apply are their own rules that they apply according to your user terms that you sign on when you go onto it. So they've got a lot of power actually in terms of saying, if they wanted to say every time you said the word 3 chickens or the phrase 3 chickens fly, they could say, for that, we don't like that and we're going to take you off our platform. There's nothing stopping them fundamentally from doing that. Of course, that's a ridiculous example, but when you then bring it down to public health issues, where we know we're facing a pandemic, where the evidence is overwhelmingly clear about vaccines, that they're saying, okay, in these instances, we're going to be taking quite strong action against those that perpetuate this thing. And of course, it's been driven by their lack of action historically, especially on accounts that have popular followers or people that are political figures.
Now, William, where is the line drawn and how is it drawn regarding what might be misinformation and what might just be somebody's experience. Now, of course, the evidence is overwhelmingly clear about the benefit of vaccinations, but there are some people who do have severe side effects as a result of those vaccinations, and they might want to go out and post about that. Would that essentially be deemed as, a post that's worthy of being taken down or flagged?
Yeah, lovely question. So what we do, for example, with a platform like Real 411, where people can report mis and disinformation about these things, and in fact they have, is that each complaint is assessed on its merits. So in as much as there may be thousands of these things, you have to assess each one in context, because depending on the way you use it, depending on if there's an image, not an image, depending on where you phrase things, it may well shift that balance in one direction or another. So it's completely appropriate, I think, for people to be saying, I'm hesitant about these vaccines. They were developed really quickly. I'm not sure that makes me feel uncomfortable. How do I know that it's not going to have, long-term side effects, etc., etc.? So they're very legitimate questions that people have to raise about those things. But that's a very different thing from people going out and saying, well, there's evidence that these things make you infertile as a woman or as a man, and that it has an impact on your private parts. Like, there is no evidence for that. That evidence simply isn't there. For people to go and say, thousands of people are dying because of the vaccine. Again, there is no evidence for that. So you have to assess these things, each of them on the basis of their particular context and their particular complaint that is there. So, and I suspect that what happened with Nicki Minaj's particular post was that it went through their system because of how many followers she has, and I'm sure that they received complaints about it, that they went and their teams would have assessed it according to their criteria, and they said, well, this is a problem.
William, we've been fighting fake news for a long time now, and it seems like COVID-19 has just sort of added petrol to that fire. Regarding the, if you look at South Africa and our vaccination rate, how much of that do you think has to do with what is being peddled on social media? I mean, India has been seen as the largest spreader of misinformation as well over COVID-19, and they're not doing particularly well as well with their vaccinations.
Well, I think it's really difficult, because one of the things that makes mis and disinformation so tricky is that it's difficult to get a sense of exactly how much of it there is, because, for example, it can spread on a number of platforms that you simply can't track and that you just have no idea what is actually going on. If there's closed, we know that there's, a number of WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups that have all of these members on them, these anti-vaxxers that are just pushing those kinds of messages. The ones that you know about, of course, that's easy, but when you don't know about them, that makes it particularly tricky. So you do know that there are very real consequences to people, and I mean, some of our news media have done some excellent stories on these things where they've gone and they've said in these people, they didn't take it because they'd heard X and Y and Z, either from their friends or their family or from some kind of figure who said these things, don't take them, they're bad or they'll kill you. And then they didn't, and then their family member passed away. So we know that there are particular consequences, but in terms of getting a precise number to that, I'm not sure how easy that is. I suspect that as things continue, we'll be able to start getting some kind of guesstimate on that. And I think that
William,
part of that will be the job of our scientists.
We have run out of time. I'm sorry to interrupt you like this, but unfortunately that's where we'll have to end it for this morning. That's the Director of Media Monitoring Africa, William Bird, talking about the effects of misinformation, especially regarding COVID-19 and the vaccinations on social media.